coming to be our studio audience tonight. You look like you're going to be a real active crowd, and you look like the kind of people that we like to have on Science Showdown. First of all, I want you to introduce Vanna Sue over here. Now, I think this is a really good crowd, Vanna. This is one of the best we've had on Science Showdown. Terrific. Now look, when you're the studio audience, of course, but the home people really have to hear you. We've got good microphones and all that, but when Vanna holds up her clap sign, we really want to hear you. We plan for everything on this show. Okay, Mr. Fleitzer, we about ready? Okay. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the only show, the only TV interview show where scientists go toe-to-toe with one another, and you, the audience, have your chance to tell what you think about the important scientific issues of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Science Showdown! An exciting show tonight. I know you're going to love it. But first, I really ought to tell you a little bit about last week's show. Remember last week we had this terrific show on Mitochondrial Eve, the feminist conspiracy. We got some great mail. I'd like to read you a little bit of the mail that came in. This came from Yale, where's this from? New Haven, Connecticut. Let's see now. This faithful viewer of Science Showdown says, hey, check this out with the legal guys. Can you see that? Now, this next letter from the faithful viewers, I think I shouldn't do this. This one's from Berkeley, California, and well, I'll tell you what, we really ought to get on with tonight's show, and never mind about last week's show. We'd like to first have a word from our sponsor. Take it away, Mom.
Science Showdown is brought to you by Edwards Scientific Supply, maker of the new 857A peptide synthesizer. Product that will get the job done when you have better things to do. Housewives, when the kids are saying, "What's for dinner?" Did you get a protein on the table soon enough? With a new 857A peptide synthesizer, you can. When you need epitome mapping, the Model 151 separation system for purification is there when you need it. Easy as 1, 2, 3. Select the protocol you want, load chemicals and amino acids, return for your peptide product. Before you know it, dinner is ready. Faster than microwave. No one but Edwards Scientific Supply can make your day as easy as this.
And we're very grateful to Edwards Scientific Supply for that product. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's show is one that I know you're going to find absolutely fascinating. Creationism and evolutionism. Now, we certainly hear a great deal about evolution these days. Detroit, for example, is back making dinosaurs. Furthermore, we read in the newspapers recently about the extinction of the savings and loan industry. We've read about survival of the fittest of the savings and loan industry. There's a lot of evolution in the news today, folks. And so we have tonight two experts, one on creation and one on evolution. Our expert on creationism is Dr. P.D.Q. Piltdown of the Institute. Dr. Piltdown's credentials are quite impressive. He teaches biology, geology, astrogeophysics, physics, and missionary aviation education. Our evolutionist tonight also has high credentials. She's a physical anthropologist. And we're going to sing. I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator for the evening, the Reverend Billy Joe Politzer. Known for his moderation and sartorial splendor. Reverend BJ, please take over.
Thank you, an honor and a pleasure indeed. This is your modest and moderate moderator, the Reverend Billy Joe, chosen here tonight because I am known to be completely fair and unbiased in all that I do, and tolerant of all points of view, able to see all sides of a question. And so today, we have created this special setting for debate to see which of the two champions may evolve. Of course, it's clear that only one can be right and speak the truth. Only one can uphold the wisdom of the ages. Only one can guide us and our children into the promised land. Now, to prove evolution, it's necessary to show that one species turns into another. Hallelujah! When I was recently on my farm in South Carolina, sitting on the porch, sipping a Coca-Cola, and watching the hills erode away, I looked at all those frisky animals. Now, they've done the same for years. The pigs keep on having pigs, the cows keep on having cows, the chickens keep on having chickens, just like they did the first day since they were created. Now, don't poke fun at my logic. Don't think I'm trying to ham it up just to bring home the bacon here tonight. Because this important fact of life is something to crow about, and it brings the chickens home to roost. Don't be sheepish about speaking up for your convictions. When evolution is taught, don't let them get your goat and make you take it on the lamb. No. No, don't horse around with the well-known laws of nature. You can watch those farm animals till the cows come home and they're just the same. And that is something for us to get animated about, ladies and gentlemen. Now you look at the dog. While dogs different breeds, they have the good sense all of the stay dogs. Anyone who thinks they change into something else is just barking up the wrong tree. Why, it's just because they've stayed the same all these years that they've been such a howling success. You've never yet seen a sheepdog change into a sheep, have you? Don't let those evolutionists hound you into thinking otherwise. To prove evolution, it's necessary to show that a monkey can turn into a man. Now, you can monkey around as much as you wish. You can ape all the human qualities as long as you like. And you still don't have a leg to stand on. You're just out on four limbs instead. To prove evolution, you've got to show us a complete and unbroken chain of fossils, each one transformed into the next, and all with the connecting links just right in the right place. But everybody knows there are gaps in the fossil record. And what's more, we don't have to have a lot of old fossils dictating to us anyway, do we? And what's more, evolution would violate the well-known law of thermodynamics, named in honor of our distinguished senator from South Carolina. We all know about Adam and Eve, not only from the good book, but from the historical record right up to modern times. We've all been reading in the paper about that scientist up at Berkeley who did that mitochondrial DNA stuff to prove that the real Eve existed in Africa. And even that ancient Greek philosopher, Democritus, knew about Adam. Science should be on the side of the people. After all, they pay for it. I say if the majority of good Americans don't believe in evolution, it can't be true. We must teach in our schools whatever the majority of our citizens believe is true. How can we trust eggheads So bring your assault rifles into the studio and cast your bullets, the ballots in favor of creationism. How can sane people believe in natural selection when it's the selection of the supernatural we want our young people to follow? How can anyone think this wonderful and complex world came about by chance, like those crazy evolutionists claim? And they talk about genetic drift. It's enough to set all of our children adrift. Well, I trust you follow my drift. No, you can't prove evolution is a fact. And if it's not a fact, ladies and gentlemen, it must be a theory. And all theories are equal, except that some theories are even more equal than others. Millions of our finest people have been brought up on creationism. And I say, why change horses in midstream for some miserable jackass of a new theory? Now, here at this table, I have first the dubious distinction of introducing Dr. Charlene Darwin, who is a mere female woman of the opposite sex, who should be home right now, and sweet, and looking after a dozen little children so that they can be brought up in the rigid ways of their fathers and learn to keep everything exactly as it is. She is a direct descendant of that infamous and notorious villain Charles Darwin, who has corrupted so many of our young people with his shocking and heretical views about the survival of the fittest. We can't imagine anything she could say in support of evolution that could possibly be as brilliant, as well-founded, as succinctly expressed, and as persuasive as the facts and the reasoning which I have heard presented previously by Dr. Showdown. But, as I said at the beginning, I am unbiased myself, and consider it only fair to hear whatever nonsense she may stoop so low as to inject into these otherwise sane and moral proceedings. Dr. Darwin.
Pretty tough for evolution. I wonder what members of the audience would say about that. Let's see. Sir? Sir, do you have a comment on that?
Yes.
Ma'am, do you have a comment on that?
No.
Dr. Darwin, please continue.
There are several lines of evidence which demonstrate that evolution is a fact. These are 1, the presence of transitional forms, 2, fossilized organisms, which are different than living organisms, 3, the older fossils are more different from their descendants than the more recent fossil relatives, and 4, the more recently 2 organisms laboratory experiments which created the first amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. In the laboratory, amino acids and various component parts of DNA were created by combining the elements of the primitive atmosphere, which was composed of H2O, CH4, NH3, and free H2O and energy from lightning. This slide shows a paramecium, which represents one transitional form between the prokaryotes and the metazoan, with all the little organelles that got together with symbiosis. In this slide, the time dimension is added to the phylogenetic tree, showing that the oldest living cells on Earth are about 3.5 times 10 to the 9th BC, and the first metazoan date to the beginning of the Cambrian, approximately 6 times 10 to the 8th BC. The dating of these time periods has been firmly established by radiometric techniques such as KAR, U-232, fission track, and paleomagnetic techniques. And here is what the first metazoans look like as they traveled around in the primeval sea, the home of the first metazoans. Later in the Paleozoic, the first animals came out onto the land. Here is shown a cross-opterygian, which is closely related to the coelacanths. This is the animal that evolved into the amphibian, which were the first to actually live on land. The cross-opterygians are transitional forms between Pisces and amphibia. Should be obvious. From the amphibia, the reptilia evolved. The reptilia invented the amniotic egg. One line of the early reptilia evolved into the dinosaurs, shown here. Another line of reptilia led to the Pterapsids, which eventually evolved into mammals. The Pterapsids are a transitional form between the reptilia and the mammalia. From the Pterapsids, mammals evolved during the Mesozoic. The earliest primates, of which one is shown here, began their radiation with the other mammals following the KT extinction. The first primates to evolve had a rhinarium and were very primitive. The first non-rhinarium primates are called haplorhini and appeared during the Eocene. Here is shown a non-rhinarium primate, a tarsier of Southeast Asia. Tarsiers represent the transitional form between the prosimians and the anthropoid primates. The oldest well-known anthropoid primate lived about 30 million years ago in Egypt and is called Egyptopithecus. And this is a slide of Egyptopithecus. From Egyptopithecus evolved the Cercopithecoids, Pongids, Panids, and humans. for stereoscopic vision, and so on. There's a macaque skeleton showing the same features, i.e. nails, grasping hands and feet, stereoscopic vision, post-orbital bar. And a gorilla, once again, with the same features, nails, grasping hands and feet, stereoscopic vision, vertical orientation. And now, a human skeleton with the same features. Also, humans are quite similar to the other primates in their behavior. Shown here is a slide depicting the relationship between various mammals based on differences in serum albumin, a protein found in the blood of mammals. As predicted by evolution, the more closely related the species, the more similar they are in the structure of their genes. Shown here is that humans, gorillas, and chimpanzees are very closely related because their serum albumin is similar. And at the top, in the middle of the slide, there's a W-shaped portion at the top of the chart showing the close relationship between humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas. Rhesus monkeys, being a little more distantly related, are shown here as slightly earlier division. And finally, possums and koala bears are the most distant. Finally, shown here is the DNA sequence of the alpha-1 globin gene comparing Homo, Pan, Pongo, Papio. And what could be clear to illustrate? I'm sure I have demonstrated that the evidence from the fossils, comparative study of anatomy, and the study of protein molecules are in favor of evolution as the process which best explains the diversity of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Darwin. And now we have the talk by our distinguished scientist this evening, Dr. P.D.Q. Showdown, an eminent man, a scholar, a fine Christian gentleman, an upstanding member of his community. He is the author of so many distinguished books and articles that I'll be able to list only a small number of them here this evening. One is called, Did the Flood Just Happen? The Fossils Say on Noah Count. Another of his well-known volumes is called What the Rocks Prove Is All in My Head Now. Perhaps his best-known volume, From Oaks to Hoax, or You Out of Your Tree If You Believe in Evolution. Dr. Showdown has engaged in numerous debates and proven his points about creationism every time to the satisfaction of his own hand-picked his own audience. Dr. Showdown, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
I want to thank Reverend Politzer for his kind introduction, but I need to remind our audience of one very important thing. Reverend Politzer has given the impression, at least it'd be easy to get that impression from his introduction, that the Institute is a religious organization, that we have some sort of religious agenda at the Institute. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to assure you that none of the scientists at the Institute has ever had a single course in theology or anything like that. Every one of our scientists was trained in the details of modern science at some major secular university. My degree, for example, is from the University of Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We do science the same way that anyone else does science. We just happen to all be scientists who have become convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that the scientific evidence better fits supernatural creation than it does the outdated notions of Darwinism. Now, ladies and gentlemen, people often remark about my name, Piltdown, and I want to assure everyone in the audience that neither I nor members of my family had anything whatsoever in any way, shape, or form to do with the perpetration of the Piltdown hoax. That fraud, that hoax, that joke was nothing more than the result of evolutionists longing to find that elusive missing link. That link will never be found, ladies and gentlemen, because it simply does not exist. Just as we can be certain that missing links will not be found, we can be sure that the evolutionist will be coming up with more just so stories in the future. He has to, ladies and gentlemen. The religion of evolution demands that the evolution find the missing links or transitional forms, so he will find them, ladies and gentlemen, whether they actually exist or not. We can live with that. I'm not opposed to any religion. It's a free country. The Founding Fathers guaranteed that in the Constitution. Freedom of religion is fine, ladies and gentlemen. All I ask is that you don't call it science. Now, Dr. Darwin, in her introduction, implied that the creationists want to introduce religious instruction and the book of Genesis into the public school classroom. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing could be further from the truth. It is true. It is true that the general editions of our textbooks, in those general editions, there are references to religious concepts. These books are made to be studied by Christians in Christian schools. But we have public school editions of these same texts. And if you look at any one of those books, you will see that there is not one reference to the Bible, the book of Genesis, or religious literature of any kind. Science cannot tell us the relationship of the created to the Creator, or why He created us, or who the Creator is. But from science, we can understand that we had to be created. Now, on this matter of Australopithecus, in a number of previous debates, I've been accused of confusing the various forms or types of Australopithecus that have been found here and there in Africa by people such as Donald Johanson. If we could look at the first slide, please. Should be here somewhere. We may have to change carousels, perhaps that's the problem. We creationists, a lot of times the projection people are evolutionists. We learn to put up with this. But in the long run, we know we're right. Uh-oh. Oh, that's it. Well, I want to show you that I do know the difference between the various Australopithecus fossils that have been found. Well, this is the so-called robust form, shown here. It has a sagittal crest, massive jaws, and massive eyebrow ridges. The form is obviously very primitive. Yet, evolutionists claim that the robustus type is the younger descendant of a supposedly more advanced form that Johanson called Lucy. If we could look at the next slide. He became, Johanson that is, Lucy, became very famous as a result of this fossil. But, ladies and gentlemen, did you hear what I just said? Evolutionists are claiming that the younger form, shown here, the one that we looked at first, is the more primitive. Now, how could that be? Why would an evolutionist claim such a thing? I think I know why. It's because they're really dealing with a series of unrelated apes. This is obviously an ape. Well, the robust form is clearly ape-like. Hansen has actually written about this. He says that Lucy, the one shown here, was essentially an ape from the neck up, and the bone fragments from several individuals that were found there in Africa looked like a small female gorilla. Yet Johansen claims that Lucy walked upright. Well, what we have then, supposedly, is an ape that walked upright. Is this then an intermediate between ape and man? This is the conclusion that we see in National Geographic and so-called educational television. But some very well-known experts in the field do not accept this analysis, ladies and gentlemen. One of these is Lord Zuckerman, a very famous British anatomist. Another is Dr. Charles Oxnard, professor of anthropology and dean of graduate studies at the University of Southern California. They have studied these creatures for many years, up to 15 to 20 years, and they conclude that these creatures were not intermediate between ape and man. Lord Zuckerman, in his 1970 book, Beyond the Ivory Tower, on page 64, said the following. And if we could, I guess I don't have that slide. At any rate, I will read it to you. No scientist could logically dispute the proposition that man, without having been involved in any act of divine creation, evolved from some ape-like creature in a very short space of time, speaking in geological terms, without leaving any fossil traces of the steps of the transition.
Hold on, Dr. Piltdown. This sounds like the kind of thing we should get our audience in on. Now, this is a fascinating question, ladies and gentlemen. Is it really true that none of the Australopithecines are ancestral to Homo sapiens? What do you think of this, sir?
All I can say, he's already wrong because he said I came from Southern California. I, of course, come from down under. Are you trying to put words in my mouth saying, say something about the other things?
This tape may be seen by many people who have been told for many, many years that Charles Oxnard has said that the Australopithecines had nothing to do with human evolution. This is our chance, Charles.
Well, I haven't studied most of the Australopithecines.
Thank you, sir, for that candid remark. Back to you, Dr. Piltdown.
I just find that very hard to believe because it says right there in Zuckerman's book that they've studied these, and I've been saying this to audiences for years. I just can't accept what you have to say there. Couldn't possibly be true. You're in Southern California whether you like it or not. Because I've been saying that for years. Well, in any event, ladies and gentlemen, notice that he said that there was not one trace of these intermediate fossils. And Zuckerman certainly does not regard Australopithecus as a missing link, as a transitional form between ape or anything of that kind, between man and ape or anything of that kind. This is the considered judgment of this eminent scientist, and that should put to rest once and for all these comic book fantasies of ape men, cavemen, or transitions between apes and people. Now, in the next slide, you see, ladies and gentlemen, Peking man. And I read almost everything that evolutionists write. And what really surprises me is that there are still articles mentioning something new or this or that about Peking man. And this is very surprising to me because there are no Peking man fossils to study. You see, these fossils were lost or stolen during World War II, and they've never been recovered. Ladies and gentlemen, these fossils no longer exist, yet evolutionists still write about them as if they did. Can this be science? Real science deals with the here and the now, not with physical observations, not with fuzzy recollections. You see, the evolutionist is driven to promote evolution, even at the expense of good science. Now, the next series of slides, look at the next one, we're going to see more evidence of this religion that drives evolutionists to do what they do. They have to invent intermediate forms where none exist. And there's no better example of this tendency amongst evolutionists than Neanderthal man pictured here. I hope, yes. Now, these pictures that you see, these reconstructions, were based on fragmentary remains. And Neanderthal was touted for many years as a prize example of the missing link. And we can look at several slides like that. While we're looking at those, we don't want to go too far. We see that Neanderthal portrayed as a stoop-shouldered, beetle-browed, bow-legged, dim-witted ape-man. And after spreading pictures like these into every sort of textbook, newspaper, and magazine and museum in the world, the evolutionists finally decided that Neanderthal was no longer needed as an intermediate. And what we see here is an amazing reconstruction in the next slide, I believe. Yes, this is the modern reconstruction, and it shows Neanderthal as a modern man. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the evolutionist can do whatever suits his purposes with these reconstructions. The new Neanderthal, properly fitted with a shave, haircut, and a bath, and a business suit, would hardly be noticed on the streets of any city. In San Diego, he might go unnoticed, even without the shave, haircut, bath, or business suit. If we could have the next slide, please. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. How did that family shot get in here? That's my niece and nephew. Okay, that's all we need for the slides. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when I was finishing my PhD work at the University of Michigan, biochemists stuck to biochemistry. They described chemical reactions in the cell that could be observed and repeated. They didn't get into questions of origins, a question that is outside the legitimate realm of science. Now all that seems to have changed. Biochemists seem to have lost touch with solid science. They're telling us, for example, that the DNA of people is 99% identical to the DNA of a monkey. Now, they tell us that this means we are closely related to the monkey or the chimpanzee. By that sort of reasoning, you see, ladies and gentlemen, we could say that clouds are related to watermelons. The cloud, you see, is 100% water, and a watermelon is 97% water. Of course, the DNA of people is similar to that of monkeys. They live in almost the same environment and eat the same kind of food. This similarity is just exactly what the creation model would predict. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I used to be an evolutionist. It seemed to me as if the evidence for evolution was overwhelming. But when I first began to study creationist claims, I found that there were several criticisms that evolutionists had no answers for. Now, these questions have been raised, you see, ladies and gentlemen. They're not questions about peripheral issues, far from it. These issues deal with the fundamental underpinning of the whole evolutionary scheme. They are foundational to the very plausibility of evolutionary theory. Without these foundations, the whole evolutionary sandcastle comes tumbling down like a house of cards. You see, ladies and gentlemen, without the vast ages for it to happen in, evolution is impossible. Even the most wild-eyed evolutionist would never claim that all of evolution took place in just 10,000 years. But, ladies and gentlemen, there's good, solid scientific evidence, good, sound physical evidence that not only is the universe and everything in it less than 10,000 years old, but the very same evidence shows beyond a shadow of a doubt that the world was created fully formed in a fraction of a second. Of course, I'm referring to polonium halos in granitic rocks. Vanna, if you could put on that slide. Oh, that's the one. Next slide, please. Oh, we have to go to the polonium halos. I think I've got gentlemen, this is some work by the famous scientist Robert Gentry. And we see here polonium halos, and they are the halos shown in the lower right quadrant, the lower left quadrant, and in the upper left quadrant. And all of these halos are formed by short half-life polonium isotopes, and they're formed by massive numbers of atoms of these very short half-life isotopes being concentrated in granitic rocks in a fraction of a second, and then they decay very rapidly, leaving these halos because of the expelled beta particles that are expelled from the polonium as it degenerates. The fact that we do not always find the uranium halos where we have the long half-lives shows that these rocks were formed instantly, in spite of the crystal structure that suggests that they were formed over vast ages. So, ladies and gentlemen, these rocks were supernaturally created. There is no earthly way that any natural process could have sorted out the short half-life polonium isotopes fast enough to produce such halos. Now you see, if there is no natural way for these polonium halos to have formed, they must have been formed supernaturally. It's observations such as these that make one realize that evolutionists don't really have all the answers. They don't even have answers to the pivotal questions concerning the underpinnings of their theory. It seems that if an evolutionist needs vast, long ages for evolution, he just wishes for them. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, evolution is really nothing more than wishful thinking. Amen. I want to talk about probability. I think that's the previous overhead transparency. Yes, that's the right one. Ladies and gentlemen, you see, the evolutionist model is like a series of reactions in organic chemistry or in biochemistry. There's a certain flow or movement of materials through the series. What every freshman chemistry student learns that this flow cannot exceed the flow through the slowest step. This is something like saying that a chain can be no stronger than its weakest link. The creation scientist, you see, knows what the weakest link of the evolutionary theory is. It is the origin of life. The evolutionist faith demands that he find a mechanistic, non-theistic, random, or chance origin for life. Without this start, the evolutionist has nothing to evolve with. He has absolutely nothing at all, ladies and gentlemen. So you see, creation scientists are correct in saying that evolution is completely dependent on time and chance. But what is it that chance, what is the chance, ladies and gentlemen? What chance is there that life started by a chance process without the help of a creator? You see, even the most simple, single-celled form of life is incredibly complex. It requires thousands of proteins and thousands of genes to code for them. The average size of a protein is 400 amino acids, and they would be present in both the right-handed and left-handed form that would be found in the evolutionist so-called primitive atmosphere of the Earth, atmosphere of the primitive Earth. But Christians are kind and gentle, ladies and gentlemen. We'll give the evolutionist a fighting chance. We'll say that life could have got started with a single protein, and we'll say that this protein only had to be a little fellow, just 100 amino acids. And we'll even say that all the amino acids on the primitive Earth were of the left-handed form. So this makes it really easy for the evolutionist, doesn't it? There are 20 different kinds of amino acids, and we see them starting off here on the left. Each amino acid has a 1 out of 20 chance of being snapped in the right place by chance. And so the chance of getting the first amino acid right is 1 out of 20. Not too bad. The chance of getting the second one right is also 1 out of 20, but getting both of them right at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, we have to multiply them together. That's 1 out of 400. Well, that's not too bad. But now we have to get the third amino acid snapped into place by chance. And that probability is now 1/400th times 1/20th. done the calculations for what it would take to get all 100 amino acids snapped into place for this simple one protein to get life started. It really wouldn't start, ladies and gentlemen, with just one protein, but we're just saying this for the sake of example. Well, the answer we get when we multiply 120 times 100 times itself 100 times is 1 over the number 1.27 times 10 to the 130th power. That's 10 followed by 130 zeros. And we can say this 1.27 times 10 to the 130th is more than 1,000 billion, 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 billion. It's not going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. There isn't a ghost of a chance. It couldn't happen. That number is so close to zero that it might just as well be zero. That is an enormous number, ladies and gentlemen. It is a number greater than the bottom of that fraction is a number so large that it is larger than the number of electrons that you could pack into the known universe side by side, all solid electrons. So that makes that number 0. You could not get the first protein even if it only needed 100 amino acids. And if you don't have that first protein, if you don't have life started by chance, then all of evolution is a chance process that could not occur by chance. So evolution, ladies and gentlemen, it is false, completely false. Now, that's not the only physical law that prevents evolution. There is the law of thermodynamics, several of those laws, but the most important one is the second law of thermodynamics that clearly states that the universe should be getting less ordered and less complex. And now we have something about that. Yes, Isaac Asimov has described the second law in very, very clear terms, ladies and gentlemen. Let me read to you what he has to say. Another way of stating the second law, that is, the universe is constantly getting more disorderly. Viewed that way, we can see that the second law all around us. We have to work hard to straighten a room. When left to itself, it becomes a mess again, very quickly and very easily. Even if we never enter it, it becomes dusty and musty. How difficult to maintain houses and machinery and our own bodies in perfect working order. How easy to let them deteriorate. In fact, all we have to do is nothing, and everything wears out all by itself. And that is what the second law is all about. Well, by whatever sort of twisted logic, I cannot imagine the evolutionist insists on believing just the opposite. How the evolutionist can live with this type of internal contradiction is beyond me. It must require a lot of faith to believe something like that. A lot more than it does to believe in a creator. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the creationist has an answer to this paradox. If the second law prevents the universe from becoming more ordered all by itself, then the universe must not be a closed system. There must be a creator external to it and independent of it, who is responsible for its origin. This has to be the case. The universe could not have wound itself up, and it could not have created itself.
Thank you very, very much.
Marvelous and stimulating and enlightening presentation. Now, as your objective moderator, I'd like to ask for a vote. All of you who would be so foolish as to vote for Charlene Darwin on evolution, please
being a bit staid. But you were terrific. You really got it. Thanks a lot. Actually, what I was going to do is cut down now. You do know, of course, the people up here. Obviously, everybody knows the Reverend Billy Joe, who I think gets a Pulitzer Prize for tonight's performance. Linda Wolf, who had a most unpleasant task of being, well, like most evolutionist debaters, unfortunately. Thank you, Linda. And my very special friend, Bill Waits, who is a geneticist at San Diego State University, a common debate partner of Dr. Dwayne Gish of the Institute for Creation Research, who was reading transcripts from debates by Dwayne Gish. Thank you very much. We hope you had fun. We had fun, but we also were hoping that you would learn a little bit about the creation of the controversy. I think I've got 2 mics on me. They got fancy gadgets these days, don't they? That's pretty nifty stuff. When you came in, those of you who came in early enough, some of you trickled in a little bit later on, you noticed that Morton Downey was on the screen. Morton Downey was doing a show on creation and evolution, and the reason we showed that is because that's an absolute microcosm of what the general public thinks about evolution. I know everyone got a little bit noisy after a while, but those of you who were here probably noticed that the audience was given a choice. The choice was creationism or atheism. They didn't get a scientist to represent evolution. They got the spokesman, the national spokesman for the American atheists. They didn't have a scientist on that show talking about evolution. The evolutionist defined, or the person representing evolution, defined evolution incorrectly. The creationist defined evolution incorrectly. Morton Downey doesn't know anything about evolution, which is very obvious. And it was just a mess in terms of any kind of transmission of the idea of evolution to the public. And this was perfectly fine for the creationists on the show, because they've been presenting the notion that you have a choice between either creation or atheism all along. And of course, when you consider that by Gallup polls and many other polls, 90% of Americans believe in God, if you give them a choice between evolution and their religion, evolution's going to lose. And that doesn't bode very well for physical anthropology, because if there's one discipline which depends upon the concept of evolution, it's ours. And just to put this perhaps in a little bit better perspective, not only are many of your students coming to your classes having been literally taught scientific creationism in high school, but they also have one vote, just like physical anthropologists. And they will vote for congressmen and legislators who will go and decide on what the budget for National Institute of Health and NSF and other sort of granting agencies will be. So then there are very practical reasons for trying to increase the understanding of the concept of evolution in the general public. We have far too many examples of the Morton Downey show, this sort of very biased and unrealistic presentation of evolution to the public, and we all have a responsibility, I think, to get across a much clearer idea. Now, poor old Charlene Darwin here, we set this up clearly so that Linda would make all the mistakes that evolutionist debaters make when they debate creationists. She was dogmatic, she was authoritarian, she was know-it-all. She used terribly complicated terms that a lay audience couldn't even understand, and you picked up on that, confusing slides. And of course, she started off immediately by insulting people's religious beliefs, which is clearly the wrong way to travel on here. And worst of all, she defended evolution, which sounds like a strange thing to say. But if you ever, most of you will never have to debate an evolutionist or even have someone on your campus who will debate one. But if you ever do, don't make the mistake of defending evolution. Evolution is a perfectly respectable scientific theory, idea, concept, whatever. It's like defending gravity. There's no reason why you should defend evolution. What you should do is attack creationism, because they're the new kids on the block. I happen to run a nonprofit science education organization that is involved in promoting evolution and fighting creationism. If you don't know what the creationists are saying, please write me. There's some brochures on the water table in the back. Get one on your way out and the stars of the show for some of their comments. Bill Thwaites has a couple of comments he'd like to make, and then the Reverend Billy Joe would like to address you too. And then after that, after these brief comments, we would like to, for however long you want to stay and rattle around here, we'd be happy to have your ideas, your experiences, and have some true audience participation. But first, Bill Thwaites.
Yeah, I guess this is on. Yes, it seems like it. I wish I remembered what the two comments were that I mentioned last night. I think one of them was that I've been wondering for a long time why it is that the creationists are so opposed to evolution when already there are conflicts between science and literal reading of the Bible as regards the shape of the earth, in regards to the fixity of the earth, regard to the position of the earth in the universe, and all of these things are very clearly spelled out in the Bible. I could give you the references, but at any rate, they don't bother. Those conflicts don't bother biblical literalists at all. So if you look and read things that speak against evolution, they're harder to find than these very clear things, like Joshua having the sun stand still and so on without Joshua and everything around him proceeding smartly east at 600 miles per hour when the earth stops rotating. Why does evolution bother them? And I came to the conclusion that it's a entrenched idea that Darwinism and social Darwinism, broadly defined, are the same thing. And that's the only reason that I can see that there's this tremendous, long-lasting, over 100 years resistance to a simple idea. And it goes into, whether we have a soul and so on, but hang it all, I think it's really the problem thinking that evolution is basically evolution, the way Politzer said at the beginning. And I think that we might be able to get further along if we were to emphasize those things like the natural selection models for reciprocal altruism, and point out that evolution is not strictly, well, in fact, not very much at all, a dog-eat-dog type of situation. We should emphasize that it's extremely difficult to try and extrapolate from biology directly into sociology. It's and speak against the idea of social Darwinism, which after all is an extremely outmoded idea. I think that in a way the creationists perpetuate the idea that the social Darwinism is an acceptable extrapolation from science, because they don't allow the teaching of the details of evolution. And one final thing, I used to be for 1 year, I taught in the public schools in California, and during my training I got the idea that public school instruction selected for people who were amongst the 25% creationists that Gallup found amongst college graduates. And there's a very tiny study that appeared in the Skeptical Inquirer. It's almost an anecdote. You can't put much stock in it, but it goes along with my presuppositions, so I tend to think it might be right. And what they find is there's anywhere from perhaps 36% up to perhaps 66% creationists teaching biology, and these in the high schools, and these are the more professional people who belong to the National Science Teachers Association. And if that survey is right, and I tend to think it might have a germ of truth in it, we've really got our work cut out for us, because people come to us who have largely been trained by biologists who are creationists. And so I think we ought to keep that in mind, that creationism at the high school level is not a minority opinion by any means. A colleague of mine found that she was the only evolutionist teaching at her grade school. All the other 18 or so teachers that were
serious comments, you might be interested to know that my first biology professor at Emory University was also a Methodist minister. Another professor, the one who taught me comparative anatomy, the cornerstone of evolution, was the superintendent of the Sunday school there. All science, from anthropology to zoology, must be non-theistic. That is, neutral on questions of religious faith, for it is simply our attempt to describe our natural world and the mechanisms by which it works. It cannot fall back on supernatural explanations. Each individual, however, has the right to go beyond science to his own faith and feelings. It has been said that the Hebrews sat beside the river of life and asked, from whence does it come? The answer, it comes from God. The Greek sat by that river of life and asked about its depth and its current. From one came religion, from the other science. I believe both are needed for the richness and fullness of life. Millions find inspiration in the Bible, but to strain at the letter of the law is to lose the power of the poetry and the majesty of the message. I am not a sheep because I believe the Lord is my shepherd. I see an evolution within that Bible from the stern Jehovah of old to the great 8th century prophets, to the example of a master teacher. When he was asked to summarize the laws of his people, he said only, love the Lord thy God and love thy neighbor as thyself. That first commandment invites us to study and appreciate our Father's world, and the second invites us to our love and compassion for all humankind. Now, I hope it is clear that I am not preaching some one church or ritual or creed. To say I believe can separate us from those of different beliefs. To say I love can unite us all. I seek not to place a ceiling on anyone's faith, but rather to build a floor upon which so many might stand. When the mother of a child in the clinic with a birth defect tells me I have a big God, I applaud her faith and her love. Who here would want to rob that mother of her hope? But what is wrong with her son? Something that went awry in the course of development. A defect in the genetic material, those genes passed on through countless generations. Now, who here would want to stop scientists from finding out more about the genes in development, whether in the development of the individual in that process we call embryology, or in that process of development of the species that we call evolution? For hopefully, all knowledge can help prevent tragedy. As I see it, the mistake of creationism is an aiming at the wrong target. Consider an analogy to my own body and my own limbs. Let my body represent a body of scientific evidence, which makes evolution such a certainty. Let my arms represent a philosophy, a viewpoint in ethics. Let the left, for example, be an atheistic one. Let the right be a religious one. Many people would disagree with the left and raise the right arm instead. But do not make the mistake of shooting at the body itself. Don't confuse the science of evolution with the philosophy or viewpoint that some have erected among it. Nothing is so precious as one's religious faith, and nothing is so tragic as the attempt to impose one's faith upon someone else, especially when it's done in the name of science. And all the centuries of religious wars and strife and persecution, we've overlooked the most important teaching of all. The kingdom of God is within you. After the recent High Court's decision on the teaching of evolution, Gish came on television to say, quote, the Supreme Court has declared God unconstitutional. Nonsense. The Supreme Court's decision frees the human spirit from the shackles of science so that it may soar to the very heavens.
This concludes the formal, if you can call it that, part of the show. If you wish to stay and talk about creationism, feel free. We can go on for as long as you can stand it. Good night. Anybody have any questions? Why don't you move to the front if you want to stay and discuss this a little bit more?
To jail.
think
or find them, or whatever you do, whatever.
Well, I think you're right. The thing that creationists, some of the more sophisticated things say, you could always say that, if you were a god, like, trying to make sort of, kindergarten making clay pots or something, you could theoretically make something like an ape, and then separately make something like a man, and they would look kind of similar. I mean, they wouldn't
But would you make the
necessarily
same
have to
mistakes,
go.
the same stupid mistakes?
No,
No, a god can
depends how
do
dumb
anything.
God is,
A
right?
god can do anything. But at least you got a god who makes stupid mistakes.
I once talked to Mr. Gould about this.
Something specific on what you did say in that fabulous
Well, I think what it seems to me I've heard is that the creation scientists have been using my work as saying that I said certain things. Now, one of the things it seems to me that they've been saying is that I have been saying that such and such a fossil, shall we say the Australopithecines, are not ancestral to humans, when most physical anthropologists would say that at least some of them were. I think that's the fact that they've been making, and what one needs to do is put that right. The kind of work that I do is not related to ancestral-descendant relationships. It's related to what you can tell by looking at this, that, or the other piece of bone. Now, looking at the bones of the foot can tell you about how the foot works. Looking at the bones of the shoulder can tell you about how the shoulder works, and so on. And what in fact we've found is the following, that the bones of the foot, the shoulder, and so on, tell you that human beings walk on two legs and do things of that sort, and we know that's true. Looking at those same bones in chimpanzees and gorillas tells you that these animals climb some of the time and walk around knuckle walking on four legs a lot of the time. And we have looked at some Australopithecine bones, and what we have found is the following. We have found the fact that the Australopithecine bones, be it foot or pelvis, are not like monkeys and apes. They are not like humans, and they are not intermediate between these living forms. They are in a third, different kind of situation. So that's the fact of what they're like.
That's what you
One
actually
then,
said.
that's what one said. And then, from that fact, one had to make some kind of deduction or speculation about what that might mean for how the animals moved. And so we know that humans move on two legs and that the apes move on four legs. And therefore we have deduced that the Australopithecines, not intermediate, so they didn't move on three legs to be slightly farcical, but that in fact what they might have done was been good at moving on two legs as well as moving on four legs at the same time. And that would make them different from both. That is what we've said. Now, one can then take a third level speculation from that, or a third level assessment, and try to say, what can that tell us about evolutionary lineages and descendants and ancestors? And of course, there are a number of different possibilities there. One is that the fossils may well have been ancestral to humans, but if they were, it was because they were mosaics. A combination of lots of different things which together made them different and not intermediate. And that's a perfectly good form of evolution. The second possibility is that as they came to walk on two legs, it was a parallel development, or a development in a radiation. And parallel developments are the stuff of evolution. They occur all the time. And so there are many different possibilities. And the business of science is to look at these possibilities and try to hold as many of them in one's mind as one can, and to test the different possibilities.
All these ideas are really tempting.
Yes, I think perhaps something that's very important, and one might now make a more general point about science, and that is that the very nature of science is the business of proving things wrong. And therefore we must be able to change our minds. To the degree that a scientist cannot change his mind or her mind, that scientist has fallen out of science and into dogma. And therefore, as one looks at science, one must expect it to change. If it doesn't change, we're not learning anything new.
Well, thank you
Sorry,
very
I'm
much,
a bit
Dr.
schoolmaster.
No, that's fine. These never need to be said. This is Dr. Charles Oxnard from the University of Western Australia.